back to another episode of The Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators with me, your host, Dr. Asia. And we're back with Langston Jacobs. So, folks, we have a good story. Langston and I were on a call for maybe a good hour just sharing this story. And I'm like, wait until we get you recording and sharing your story. Thank you so much for coming on our podcast, Langston. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Welcome. I remember a part of that is I didn't necessarily think I was a good candidate. And the more, I
Yeah.
talked and shared, you're like, you are a good candidate.
Yeah. I think that people get into this place of, well, I wasn't a teacher or I didn't teach for long enough. And, on the exit interview, we say an educator is someone who supports young people in an education setting. So that's paraprofessionals, family liaisons, admin, all kinds of folks are educators. So I'm glad you did email me, and I'm glad we had a chance to chat because you absolutely are the perfect candidate for our show. So I'm glad you took that risk.
Well, thank you. And, I'm glad that you've taken the risks and followed through with doing this show because it's helping so many people, Langston Jacobs included.
Yeah, awesome. And I'll say Langston has told me that on his walks in the morning, he listens to the podcast, and I told him that it'll be a surreal feeling to see yourself up there as a thumbnail and to hear your own story. If you choose to hear it, listen to your episode. But I guess we'll jump into it. Start us off. What helped you decide that going into education was for you?
Well, I think for me, I think it was something that's always available. And when I was going to grad school many years ago, one of the job search engines that would always come up, one of the things that would come up is substitute teacher. And it was kind of like a grad student thing to do. You substitute teach, you bring your books in, and you know, you just do your studying while you're supposed to be substitute teaching. And so that was kind of like, that's what you do. You get paid for just sitting there and studying. But I didn't do that. I came in and this was in another state. This was in the state of Indiana. And I came in and I just really enjoyed the setting of kids, enjoyed the setting of, although it's a very static environment, for me, it was very dynamic, meaning every change, because sometimes you come in and you be a PE teacher. Sometimes you come in and you be an English teacher. And so it was like exciting to me to see, what I was going to do. And so I started off just being a substitute teacher, or now they would call it guest teacher.
Okay. And how long did you do that for? Tell us more about that experience because a lot of folks don't necessarily want to sub, right? They're like, oh no, I don't know if I can deal with all the guesswork of who the kids are and trying to figure out different schools. But for you, it sounds like you loved it. So tell us more about that experience.
I think I liked it, number one, because it was a job and I needed a job. Number two, it was somewhere that I felt that I was accepted and needed. And I got some kind of immediate affirmation. I can remember one of my first substitute teaching roles. There was a young man that was kicked, a young African American man, hence a young African American male. The theme was, kicked out of his class. He was outside with, like an individual table and books, and just sitting there. And I walked up to him and I just started talking to him, and I started asking him, what is he doing? And later on in that afternoon, the primary teacher said, "How did you get him to do any work? We never get him to do any work." And in my mind, I have no formal training, anything. I was like, I talked to him, asked him how he was doing. Does he need help with everything? And what I found out that is that the work was easy for him. And so my first time, kind of being thrown into the fire, I'm thrown into what is the school to prison pipeline, which is systemic racism, which is a brilliant black young male who was separated from his peers, who was outside and who was probably more intelligent than most of his peer group in there, and for no reason outside. But I immediately connected to him and got work done. And I was like, how come your primary teachers aren't doing this? How come they're not connecting and doing this? So those were some of my experiences, and those were some of the experiences that kept me going back to substitute teaching.
Yeah, makes sense. And being at multiple schools, maybe in multiple districts, like you said, you're in Indiana, you probably did have a full bird's eye view of what the pipeline to prison looks like for our black boys and our black girls, especially. You told me in our kind of pre interview that you ended up going and deciding, like, this is going to be a long term thing. I think I'm falling in love with the idea of being in education long term. So, what was that journey like? Okay, so after you've been subbing for a while and seeing what it looks like to witness the pipeline to prison, and I'm sure you saw some harm done not just to our black kids but also to probably other educators. You've made the decision that you then wanted to go in to education more permanently. So tell us about that part of your journey.
Once again, I was, in the state of Colorado and going through the process of similar guest teacher in the state of Colorado. And I can remember being in a kind of like a big interview room with a bunch of potential guest teachers. And they started weeding out everyone. And they said, and the HR lady, she said, Langston, she said, you really shine at this. And in my mind, I'm just doing what I like to do. She said, why have you ever thought of being a permanent, you know, guest teacher? I'm like, what the heck is that? And she kind of said, well, this is where you'll be, on site at some of our higher risk schools, and you'll be there to kind of fill in because sometimes it's hard to get guest or substitute teachers for some of those quote unquote Title I or high risk schools. And I thought about it. I said, wait a second, this is a full time position. Being in a school, being, there full time, not having to go ahead and click, what school you're going to, because then it was an online platform picking what days. I said, that sounds good to me. And it also came with benefits. And so came with health benefits because it was a full time position. So I chose to do that. And similar Langston fashion, I think my first class was like an ESL class, and I'm not prolific in Spanish. And once again, after that class, the assistant principal said, Langston, you really rocked in that class. And I'm like, what did I do? And they just, and because I didn't know, I was just being myself. But breaking it down, they said, your command, you seem to have a love for the kids. The kids were listening to you, and in my mind, I'm thinking, aren't they supposed to? Aren't they supposed to listen to you?
Yeah, that part. Yeah, that part.
And so I did not know that I had a skill set, but I did know that I had a passion for this community of Denver. When I came back to Denver, this school was in what is known as Park Hill area. Just community school, and I did something really interesting when I got there. I'm a big soil person. I'm a big earthy person. I felt that soil on that school, and I felt like this is where I was supposed to be. And once again, I said, if anybody's driving by and sees this 6'1" black man digging up some earth and running it through his fingers, what is he doing? But I would walk around the school and I would just either pray or just quite honestly listen to Earth, Wind, and Fire. This was before the Asia Lion podcast, so I was listening to Earth, Wind, and Fire before that was my before
You
I
know
listened
what?
to the exit interview podcast.
We all love Earth, Wind, and Fire. That's all right. I support that 100%.
Okay, okay, yeah, getting a thumbs up for that. And so I would come in and I would always be gravitated to the students that seemed to have that stamp of rejection on them. And because those were the students that were the most animated, I thought they were the most funny. Their behaviors, which may have seemed troublesome, like blurting out in classroom or hanging out in the hallways, those never bothered me. I looked at that as opportunities to connect. I looked at that as opportunities to hear their story. I looked at it as an opportunity, to just share a quick, laugh. And so I was never intimidated by those sorts of things. And I think that was the population that I felt like this, that nobody else wanted to deal with, that somehow my life had perfectly suited for that. And so what I would, was enjoying that role of guest teacher. And the only thing with being a guest teacher is I didn't have a space. I didn't have an office. I would come in and plop my backpack or something like that, maybe in the teacher's lounge. And sometimes the teacher's lounge is kind of territorial. They're in there, studying. They're in there, eating their vegan burritos and chocolate chip cakes and all that other stuff, and they looking at me like, don't touch my vegan burrito special or whatever. But anyway,
Yeah,
but the point is, it's
yeah.
kind of territorial, and I kind of wanted a place of my own. And because I always felt like, excuse me, can I sit in the staff lounge? And
Mm-hmm.
although that was the right thing to do, I still felt like a guest. And so I started thinking about how nice it would be to have my own classroom, how nice it would be. And there's an opportunity that came up where there was a young man in a middle school who was transitioning out because his mother was had poor health care on the East Coast. And I had been putting my name out there as far as like, hey, I want to teach full time. And I got called by the administrator of that school, and she said, hey, there is a spot for special education. Would you be interested? And I'm like, heck yeah! And it would start in October, which means the school year is already started. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I talked to the school that I was at, being a guest teacher, and they said, sure, try it out. And I went and I interviewed, and they asked during the interview for the SPED, special education teacher. They asked me about my day to day work, and I said, I'll come in and talk to students who are non-speakers. They just may respond verbally or through sign language, and I'll take them on breaks and I'll talk to them, and I will kind of be a one-on-one support for them. And they just kept on looking at each other every time I answered, and I didn't know if they were looking at each other because I was giving the wrong answer, but apparently they were looking at each other because I was giving the right answer. And they said that's kind of like how it
Mm-hmm.
is dealing with a special education classroom. Special education sometimes seems like a bad word, but it's just basically the need for an individualized education plan. And so that's all
Mm-hmm.
that means. And it seemed like I had the skills for that. So I accepted the position of being, taking over a class from of sixth through eighth graders whose whose educational and IQ scores were anywhere from 38 to 68. And so I had a combination of
Mm-hmm.
genders, combinations of verbal. I had a, Down syndrome, blessings of kids, and, some youth that had all sorts of things. And so it was kind of, and the classroom was kind of like in a corner. And I was just so happy to have a classroom with my name on the top, got the little, Olin Mills picture taken, ding, with the chalkboard behind me. Like, I got my own
Yeah.
class. I'm like, yes, it's my own space. And I was feeling really good about it. And the curriculum was passed down to me from, the previous teacher. And not only was the curriculum passed down to me, but kind of like the schedule, kind of like everything. And I was just so excited to have my own class. But when I went to do some of the assignments with the students in learning stations, the curriculum was very quote unquote vanilla. What I mean by vanilla,
Mm-hmm.
I mean it wasn't very challenging. There were like note cards, and the note cards were actually, where is Billy hiding? I see Billy hiding over there. Oh, look there. And I would challenge, I said, why are they doing the same thing over and over again? And
Yeah. I'm sorry to cut you off. I just want to say that is this idea of passing down curriculum or doing the same thing year after year. I've I remember before my first year of teaching, I was sitting in the main library here in Aurora, and I had out all my Houghton Mifflin notebook. I'm a first year teacher. I'm holding on to all my text as hard as I can because I want to make sure I do right by my students. And I had everything laid out. I had my planner out, my little blue planner. And I remember a woman walking past me, and she said, are you a first year teacher? And I'm like, yes. She said, this is what I think you should do. This is what I've done. Write your curriculum one time and do the same thing every year. And I'm like, I said, oh, okay, thank you. And I just felt so terrible for her students because that was her mindset. She was an older woman. I don't know how long she had been teaching because age has nothing to do with how long you were teaching. But I just thought how terrible that is for her students and for her own mind, her own critical thinking, that she didn't even pause and say, "Let me mix this up. Let me see what else is out there." Just this is week 1. This is week 9. This is week 14. This is and when we get into that place of we're doing the same thing over and over, it's time for us to leave. So I just wanted to interrupt you because I remembered that story that someone else had done this, tried to do the same thing to me. But of course, I decided against that. But go ahead, continue.
Well, thank you for that. And also, what is the purpose of schools? Purpose of school is learning. And so a lot of these students were being celebrated because they were able to repeat Billy is hiding. But I challenged that. I said, that's just memory. That's not necessarily learning. I said, learning is really being challenged into a difference of curriculum, something that, meets the child where they're at, something that's culturally relevant, something that's exciting, that has colors. I mean, these note cards look like they were made in the 70s. It looked like they were hand drawn,
Mm,
read alongs. And so I started to use the computer. I started to use stories about animals. I started using stories about American history that had videos with them, that had read-alongs with them, and I took a risk. But the students liked that a lot more than just
mm,
the regular, thing. And I remember this book called the Chocolate Touch. It's kind of like a spin on the Midas Touch, and it was our group reading, and I just love reading the kids. I do. It's kind of like it's calming. They get to listen to your voice. And so during a transition, I would always read from them the book that was passed on, to me, the Chocolate Touch. And it was a kid who, really craved chocolate. And, every time, he got the wish, like the Midas, everything he touched turned into chocolate. And, it's like, no, I don't want this. But I noticed all the characters in the book were blonde hair. And they said, her blonde hair and, and so forth. And the chocolate got on her pretty pink dress and all these things. And I can remember right in the middle of that lesson, I closed the book and I apologized to the students. I said, I apologize because this book is not relevant, or it doesn't have the same connection to you. And I looked around, I said, how many of us in this room have blue eyes? Nobody raised their hand. How many
mm,
of us in here even have blonde
mm-hmm.
hair? Nobody raised their hand. So I apologized. I closed the book. I said, let's find something that we can read for our community reading that speaks to us. And they said yes, once again, taking a risk. And a lot of the reason why I was taking those risks is because the my supervisor, who was going to be mentoring me, went on maternity leave, and so I did not have a supervisor at that time.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Mm,
And so my supervisor, who was very pregnant, God bless her, she went on maternity leave a little early. And that happens. And so they had a backup person, who was he was actually the dean of instruction, who was going to be my supervisor after she went on maternity leave. Unfortunately, the backup supervisor got terminated for inappropriate, what do you call it when you take somebody down? Safe physical management. He got
mm.
terminated for poor safe physical management, breaking up a fight. And so I didn't have a a mentor, and my backup mentor wasn't there. And so although there were others who would come by and try and help, I was basically on my own in the corner. And I realized that they liked me being in the corner because nobody wanted to deal with sped.
Yeah. This is really interesting that you're talking about supervising or mentorship. And I feel like we've had so many folks come on the show who have been left without any supports, right? Whether they were guest teaching, whether they were long term, whatever the situation, we've had so many folks who said, my principal left mid year and the assistant principal became the principal and they never came into my room. No one ever checked in with me. They were just happy that I was in the school building and I filled in and didn't give me the support. And so I want the audience to know this is not a one off. That if you listen to this show over time, you'll hear more and more people saying, I want to always do best for my students. And I did what I did. And I did a great job in my heart. But I know that there's supposed to be other people supporting me, and that just did not happen. Either it didn't happen the whole time they were teaching or just a small part of the time. But I think that, and we'll get to this in a moment, when I think about what we need for Black educators to stay in education, some of that is probably, and people have talked about this, is mentorship and guidance, right? Not just someone to come and evaluate with the rubric and the checklist and you meet, but someone to say, let's pause for a minute. I love that you use this book. Have you considered doing this as well? I love that you take the kids out after lunch because it gets that energy out. But did you think about X, Y, and Z? And we're just not getting the mentorship we need. And if we are, it's not for a sustained period of time where maybe it's more than 6 months or a year. It's a couple years. So I wanted to say that while you were talking about not having that support you needed, not once, but twice, that is not an uncommon occurrence for folks.
Well, thank you. And you mentioned, me being in that corner classroom. You mentioned everybody avoiding that area. There was one time when the area of my classroom got a lot of attention. After lunch, students are usually kind of sleepy, and I was passed along in the curriculum for everyone to watch CNN in 10, which is 10 minutes of CNN of, what's going on and so forth. And I just, would line everybody up after lunch, press play, and half the class was asleep through that. And so I was like, why am I doing this? So in typical Langston Earth, Wind, and Fire fashion, what did I start doing to transition kids in from lunch? We did Soul Train line. So I put on
Yeah.
Soul Train, and the kids were coming in. Of course, they didn't want to dance, and I would come in dancing like a Soul Train line and so forth. And then all of a sudden, students and people started coming by, and teachers started coming by, like, what is going on in there? I hear music, I hear that, and I was like, oh, am I in trouble?
Yeah.
Am I in
Right.
trouble
Exactly. Yes.
for doing this? And I said, what is going to be my story for this? My story is going to be, hey, the kids are bored. It's just 10 minutes of activity, 10 minutes of this and that. But what I found out was that they're looking in admiration of, like, that is a good idea. But once again, first time teacher, no mentor, no backup mentor. I'm just trying to work things through. And so no affirmation of, Langston, that is a good job, or even no affirmation of, can you choose a different song or whatever, but the
Mm-hmm.
kids really liked it. The paraprofessionals in there really liked it. Another loophole would be not having a mentor, and that is in the program that I was in. Part of the process of being a first time teacher that doesn't have a license is you have to go through an alternative licensing program, which
Can you
means
talk about that? Yeah, talk about
yeah,
that, please.
yeah, great. And so that it's one of the things where you go through, and in special education specific, you have to show that you are, prolific in, math, language arts, science, and I can't think of what the other one is, but it's the four major, core areas of school. And I
Social
remember
studies?
there's a
Is it social
test.
studies?
What's that?
Is it social studies?
Social
Or
studies, yes. Social studies, thank you. Social studies, I'm figuring, I know how to take tests. I've been in grad school. I know what I'm doing, and I took the test because I wanted to hurry up and get it over so I can get my license, so I can be officially, this is my classroom, not this is my classroom with no mentorship, with no supervision. This is Langston's classroom. And I remember I took it and I failed the math portion horribly. I mean, I
Mm.
was like, how can I fail that bad? My score of the math
Mm.
section was horrible. And my score in, I think, the history section was pretty horrible too. It wasn't as bad, but I knew. And so I was like, wow. And so I remember talking to the school administrators. They said, Langston, you're doing a great job. We love having you here. We're getting good response from the parents, teachers, everything. You're doing a great job, but we need you to pass this math practice. And I was like, wow. So I need to lesson plan. I need to be on time like everybody else. I'm getting paid at a substitute hourly rate because that's how that was. And so when I didn't work, I didn't get paid. And so struggling through lesson plans, struggling through with how to do, IEP, struggling with all these things. Now I needed to pass this math class that was very difficult in order for me to be a certified teacher, which means I would have the benefits, I would have the days off, I would have all things as a teacher. And I said, okay, I may have just had a bad day at this. So I took that
Right.
practice a second time. I think my score actually got worse the second time. I was like, how
Oh
do you get worse?
no.
How do you get worse? And so I'm feeling all this. My dream is coming true. I'm a teacher. I have my own classroom. Kids, students are responding well to this, even though I don't have mentorship. Parents are responding to me. I felt really good, but I could not pass that praxis, the math portion in particular.
Hmm. Yeah. So, and I think again, this is something we've heard before from folks that mention the praxis. Many don't, but they talk about the difficulty in passing it, having to take it multiple times. Um, did you ever end up passing it? If not, what happened? If so, that we need to know.
Well, I wish this part were true that I passed it, but I never did pass it. And with that program that I was on, there's uh, like like 13 months or something like that you have to pass that. And so although I was ready to jump back in that second year, I had kind of timed out on the time of that program to pass it. And so I was given the option, although they wanted me to stay in that teaching role. They said, we ethically or according to the rules or whatever, we cannot put you back in as a teacher in this because you only had so much grace period to pass that. And so they offered me a paraprofessional role. And I had gotten used to, not that there's anything wrong with paraprofessional, but I had gotten used to having my own classroom, my own space, my own refrigerator, my own, Soul Train line space. I had gotten used to all these
Right.
things. I'm like, and so I, continued to job hunt and saw that there were some jobs open for school leadership in the charter schools. And so I applied and accepted a job as a um, dean of culture in a charter school. And I said, this is pretty cool. I don't have the lesson plan. I don't have to be mentored. I'm still in education, but now I'm in, as I pound my chest, I'm in educational leadership. I'm in a leadership
Yeah.
role. So I felt like, it was kind of like things that maybe even I can get out of this guilt cycle of not passing the practice. I can get out of this of not thinking, my dream is, over being, in a teacher. I said, now I can be a dean and work, side by side, an assistant principal, working in culture. But as we know, those are some of the things on paper what they want a dean to do. But what I learned a few weeks in is a lot of school cultures want deans to do what the role of assistant principal was when I was a child, and that is to hand out suspensions and tell kids and parents that you're suspended. And they're the role of not going in the hallway and checking and seeing what our students okay, but the idea of assigning consequences for kids not being in a classroom, why they're not in the hallway, why are they late, why did they stand up and square off against all that. And so, me being, authentically Langston in that role, I found that me talking to the students and me telling them, hey, this is, things like that, I started getting challenged. Well, why isn't this child suspended? Well, why is this that? And, why are these kids still, hanging out in the hallway? And so I went off script of being Langston, and I'm blessed with a loud voice and so forth. And so I got to this point where I started becoming a different person. I would go out into the hallways, kids were out there, and I would just bark, "You guys got 5 seconds to get in class, 5, 4, 3," and they would just run to get into class.
Mm.
But I noticed, although that was working, my level of connection with the students when they were sad in the lunchroom, when they were like hungry, when they were late and showing up, to school, maybe smelling like, like marijuana, or showing up, you could tell they were hungry. They really didn't want to explore any more of that. They were more just like, "Man, deuces, dude, I'll just go to class because I don't want to hear you." And so I had to start to, just kind of, compartmentalize that, because I had become good being a tool for kids to go back to class. I had become good at being someone that once my shadow hit that hallways, the kids will run. I had become good at telling parents, your kids are suspended, but it started to affect my social emotional health. I started to be stressed out being in that role. And so I tried, yes.
Sorry, I have to pause you here because when we talked about this previously, and I was hoping that you would bring this up, and folks, Langston is not a small man here, okay? So yes, and I don't know if he'd mentioned this, but he's a taller, larger black guy, right? And he talked about this checklist of how this is a dean role and this is what it is. And I want to pause because I love that you said it was changing who you were. And I feel like there's so many black men that I talked to who've been in a dean role who really had a lot of pride in that power dynamic of the barking and the yelling and the da 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 and this fear piece. And I've never heard folks in this way say, and I'm probably sure they've thought about it, just didn't share with me, but say like I didn't like who I had become, and it wasn't about power; it was about relationships, and I wasn't experiencing and providing that relationship that I typically would have in the beginning. And I love that you said that because we in education, or they in education, love a black man in a dean role as if black men don't have heart or desire belonging or desire care and are just really good at being the disciplinarian. They just need to get in the class and yell and don't have a beautiful and soft and open spirit. And I think that's such a disservice to education when we pigeonhole our black men in these types of positions, and women too, but I see it a lot more with black men. So I just wanted to pause and say that.
Well, thank you for saying that, and that's affirming. That's something that I didn't hear, because it's kind of like a good dean blank students, the rates of this, a good dean this and that. But what I was finding out was being a good dean was being an unhealthy Langston. Um, I found myself, forgetting things that I would normally do. One time I remember I went to Walmart, and Walmart parking is everywhere, and my parking beep didn't work, and I honestly forgot where I parked. I can remember, my not getting my cup refilled as I did when I first started education, with that back and forth of, "Hey, student A B, I enjoyed seeing you today," with the high five, with the love, and come and get you. I wasn't getting filled at all, and it was starting to affect my memory. It was starting to affect my countenance. My shoulders were starting to slump. I was starting to be grumpier than normal at home, and I remember even going to my personal doctor and saying, "I'm very concerned because I need to have my head examined." No pun intended. And so went through tests with memory, went through tests of all things. Thank God nothing was wrong. And the doctor just said, "Langston, you're overwhelmed. That's why you cannot remember." And
Mm. I need you to say that one more time, please.
all the tests that I had, blood tests, tests of my brain, memory test, and I wanted to rule out because I thought maybe something medically was wrong with me. And the doctor said, all the tests come back, Langston, everything's normal. Actually, you have a very excellent memory. You are just overwhelmed. And the doctor gave me this illustration of a plate. Is if your plate is full, if something's added on it, it's going to either fall off or it's not going to make it on that plate. And she said, right now, Langston, this is the illustration. Your plate is full. And I started thinking about, who is this person that's coming home where, I was doing the things. I was taking the long drive home. I was counting to 10 before I get in the door. And I noticed my family would kind of look at me and give me that look like, which version of you is going to come through this door. And it started to become pretty hurtful to me. Is this the is this the spouse? Is this the dad that I can come in and I can joke with and I can grab your leg and all that stuff? Or is this the one that I need to take a minute and chill and see what temperature you are before you going in? And that started to affect my heart, because I wasn't who I felt I was designed to be. You mentioned, like, a lot of the things that may look on the surface, with me being over 6 feet, over 250 pounds, all those things. But I'm a poet. I'm an empath. I care. I care about not just the kids, but their parents who work 60-hour construction jobs, or who work multiple jobs, and really don't understand why their child is working, that's is having these behaviors. I care because I'm a working class man myself. And what I would always tell parents is, hey, we're going to end up shopping at the same King Supers. We're going to end up shopping at the same Walmart. We are a community. But what I felt was the role that I was doing was taking me out of that community and making me an enemy of the community. And so I had to retool how I did the role of dean. And so, go ahead.
So, folks, you've said so much, Langston, in this small amount of time. I want to acknowledge that you have spoken about your family. One thing that I talk about in the work and community around racial battle fatigue, around the impacts of racism in education and the impact of all these things on education, is that we're not having enough conversations about the impact of these things on the families of our Black educators. That we hire folks, but we don't think, I'm not hiring just that one employee. I'm hiring them and their grandmother and their aunt, the two cousins, the roommate, whoever, the children. And so when we're talking about hiring strategies and how many folks of color and things like that, we have to be mindful that we go home to community. And if we're not having the type of experience in schools and whatever roles these are, that's going to bring us joy, it impacts family first, right? And so I'm so glad that you acknowledged that and you said that out loud, because I really want the audience to hear more people talk about the ways that this work, whether you're working for folks of color or not, or white folks or whoever, it's impacting our relationships with our families. And some of that is not reversible all the time, just because we quit the job. So I appreciate that. And I also appreciate that you said, hey, I'm a working class person too. You're going to see me at the King Supers. You're going to see me at the Walmart. You're going to see me back to school shopping with my children, because that's important too, to see that Black educators period, are having a human experience just like the rest of us, right? And that cannot be overstated. So I really appreciate you saying that. That's so important. Continue, please.
And so, how did that look? Me redefining what a dean was. That same desk that I would stand out there and bark at the students, I brought in my own watercolor set. I brought in my own art easel. And so I would be out there while kids are in class, and I would be drawing. I would be exercising that artistic part. And before you know it, the same students that were coming out of class, they would walk up to me. What are you doing? I'm like, I'm painting. It's like, that's dope. I didn't know you could draw. I didn't know you could do this and that. And there was a connection there. And as kids started talking about what do they want to be, what do they want to do, I started telling them, I said, I was honest with them. They said, why are you out here drawing? I said, you know what? It calms me down and it's fun. Do you like what I'm doing? And the first time they would like frown, like, what are you doing? But they would always come by and see, what is Langston drawing? What is he painting? What is he working on? And and I would do like poetry. I'm not, I can't like rap, but rap is poetry, and I love doing poetry. And I love doing all these things, and I love going for walks, and going back to taking kids on groups on walks just to get that temperature change and to get that breath of fresh air. And so I redefined that role for me, because it was healthier. It was more of who I am.
Yeah, I love that. I
So
love that.
mhm.
So go. You go. Go
And
ahead.
so
Continue.
I had started feeling good. There was still that back and forth with a lot of the job duties, but I got a chance to do what I thought was an amazing thing. I got a chance to be the dean of students at my own kid's school. And I thought this was the best of every world. I mean, I'm a community person. My kids are there. I can look after my kids. Students can see me in the role as father. Students can see me in the role as, a dean. My kids get to see me as that. I can have my own. And so it was basically like all the intersectionality in a good way I thought was really going to exist. And it was so fun that first, 30 or 60 days being a dean of students in my kids' school, getting a chance to be a part of the leadership, getting a chance to enact policy. And this was another charter school, and so I was like, get to take my kids to school, pick them up, and they felt like they were you know, maybe a little bit better cut than other kids because they could go into the staff lounge when I was there and get leftover donuts, and so all those fun things that they had. But there was another part of it that was brewing underneath that it took me about another year to figure out what effect that was having on my own children. Yeah, and so as a dean, of course, you have to suspend students or give consequences, and I noticed that the more I got involved with the dean role, a lot of students, especially students that were having a lot of difficulty in behavior, they started becoming closer to me because I saw them because they weren't in class, and I noticed that the other part of that is my own children started to separate further from me. Instead of saying, you guys meet me here, right after the bell rings, this and that, it started to become more of a separation. Well, I'll see you 20 minutes after that. And there started to be more separation of it. Like, I don't necessarily want to talk about school. And we kind of agreed, sure, we're all in the same place. Let's agree on the ride home. We don't talk about school. We talk about something else. It seemed very natural until the last day of school. The last day of school, I can remember going home, and last day of school should be a very joyous celebration. We're thinking about what we're going to do in the summer. We're thinking about what pools we're going to go to, what summer movies we're going to see. And my oldest son started to cry in the car on the way home, and I'm thinking myself, you are breaking down and crying on the last day of school. Did you have a rough day? Did you have this? And he said, I'm good, Dad. I just don't want to talk about it. My wife ended up talking to him about it because he was actually very uncomfortable talking to me about how he was being bullied as far as residual attack and crossfire for me applying consequences to his peer group. And he was very, very
Mm.
scared to tell me because he didn't want to be labeled as a snitch. He didn't want to be labeled that, but it came out, about a month after school let out that he finally felt that now that school wasn't in session in the summer. He said, I don't necessarily feel safe there because student A, student B, student that I know that they suspended you, but when they see me in the restroom, when they see me in the cafeteria, what they're saying to me is things that are things of aggression, things of basically bullying. They're really calling me names and so forth. And I did not want to tell you, Dad, because I know you would go and you would hold them accountable for it. But how is that affecting me as a person? And so once again, the utopian fit that I thought I had of being in school leadership, of being this and that, and being a dean, and being one that looks at things outside the box, the effect that it was having on my own son. And I've talked to other educators, and some of them said sometimes when you're in those roles, it's best not to have your kids in the same school as you. And so I ended up
Yeah.
yeah, I ended up taking my kids out of that school and still working in that school. And I can remember bringing to my leadership team, and this is something that I still wrestle with. I brought up to my leadership team that, hey, my kids don't necessarily feel safe in this school. And I think we need to look at some of our systems. And the response that I got, I can still feel it in my gut now. The response was twofold. Number one, the response was, that's one opinion. And number two, the response was, you're dean. Why can't you just fix it? And I was saying that's not the reason why I was bringing it up. I wasn't bringing it up to be to have my kids to be shamed. I was bringing it up because we're a community school, and as a community, what we do is we bring up problems and we solve problems and we work together. And part of the beauty of this of being a part of this school system is that we get to show up as a community. We get to show up as family. I wasn't the only educator who had kids in that school. I said it was amazing, and we kind of developed like a staff kids culture. And what I found out is that staff kid culture had a lot of them kind of having their own therapy group amongst themselves about how it felt to be, students in
Oh,
that culture.
interesting.
But the parents didn't know because we're so busy with deadlines, we're so busy and this and that. But the kids kind of got together. It's like, this is how it feels to be, you know, Langston's son here. This is how it feels to be, teacher X, Y, and Z. So they felt a certain amount of pressure that was an additional. And what they also shared is that they really didn't necessarily feel comfortable always talking about it, and not in those spaces.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And I'm just thinking about the kids. And there are lots of folks who brought their kids to a school that they're working in. And I don't know how many folks have sat down with their kids to say, how's it going for real? Right? And the fact that you said that it was supposed to be beautiful. It was supposed to be this place where it must be a good school because her kids are there too. That's a beacon. And I know a lot of people who say that, like, oh, the principal's son goes there, so I know it's a good school, and not understanding the consequences of those decisions on kids sometimes, right? Maybe it's not always going to be the way your son experienced it, but there's probably more than we imagine that do experience backlash. I also want to say the fact that you brought this to your administration and they decided to lobby it back to you, right? In this way of like, this is not our problem, or whatever way they try to move around or cower to or bend to that issue is not uncommon, and you know that, right? I'm sure, like, it's shocking when you said it. My whole chest, like, I just sunk. But we also know that's a part of the push out. That's a part of the way we get rid of folks, is we just kind of um, gaslight them, or we say like, oh, this is not important, or you'll be all right, or you're the dean, do some magical thing to make this stop happening, as if we're not living a human experience, like we're not living um, the day to day with folks in our families who are experiencing these heavy things. So thank you. I want to ask, you were a dean for how long, and then like what was the last straw, I guess, that helped you decide it was time to leave education?
Well, I was a dean for a little about 2.5 years, and I think I was looking at my family and the effect that it was having on my family. And I remember I thought I was at the mountaintop with being a part of the executive leadership team. I thought I was at the mountaintop with having paid summers off. But after a couple summers, because I just thought that if after these 3 or 2.5 months off, I'm going to come back refreshed, I'm going to come back strong. It's like everything's going to be erased. And when I found myself physically ill, I look back, how those Google photos, or I look back through the years and I said, wow, I carried a cold, not a COVID cold, but a stress cold for like 2.5 months of the school year. And it was just because my body was so stressed. Some of it I can own, although they say, have a lunch. I would end up eating my lunch at about 10:15 every day, like about 10:15 in the morning, because that would be the only time that I would have before lunch hours would start and where free time would start. And so I said, if I can eat a good, healthy meal around 10:15 in the morning and stretch through that. So my nutrition was failing. My health was, I carried a cold, and I found myself not like coming to work, could not wait for the for each and every 3-day holiday, could not wait for all those things. And that was the reason why I was showing up. And I said, every time the school calendar would come up, there would be more, professional development days. And I'd be like, yes, this is going to be, but it wasn't enough for me to return. Monday, I felt terrible. Every Monday I showed up. Friday, I felt terrible, and I started feeling terrible even in the middle of that. And I had to look at, I had to just kind of count the cost, of the person that I'm becoming, of how long my immunity didn't seem to be working. I would be doing the chicken soup things, I'd be doing the vitamin C things, and people be like, and once again, it's a story. Oh, you're just soft. You're not a good teacher, because good teachers have like the most amazing immune systems in the world. What's wrong with you? And even the things with the kids. Well, it goes back to, well, if you would be a yeller, if you would do this and that, you wouldn't be having these problems. The problem is, you're too easy on these kids. Your suspension legs are long. And so it was all these things that I started to have to say, I can't do it anymore. There's no check mark that is saying this is worth it. It wasn't the pay. It wasn't the summers off. And the coolest thing ever, like fall break, I thought fall break is awesome. To have fall break, to have spring break, all these things, my bucket never filled back up.
Yeah, that's all I'm going to say. Yes, yeah. So, seeing that you've had this experience, the next question we always ask is, what do you believe that schools, if you believe this, schools, districts, unions can do to keep black educators in school buildings based on your own experience? Is that something that you believe is possible? Do you have ideas and tips? What do you think?
Well, I think it's always possible if people need a job. So that's possible. But I think it's that retention, and it's that ability to have a second generation of success. Here in Colorado, and this is not a plug for University, but we have, Deion Sanders, who's prime time. That's one generation of football excellence. And he's had a chance to pass that down to his own natural children playing at an excellent level at Colorado University. And we don't get that many opportunities as black educators to pass down that black excellence. We don't get that many chances. And so, people can have a job. McDonald's is going to hire you. Schools are going to hire you because it's a high turnover. But to be able to have that seasoned educational professional that's able to help you finesse through, angry parents, that seasoned black educational professional that's able to help you through the racism that's in school, that seasoned educational professional that's in a leadership position, that it's not just a policy of equity and so forth. It's really knowing how to navigate that a seasoned Black educational professional who can help Langston pass the praxis, a seasoned Black educational professional who can say, Langston, my kids were in school too. This is what we can do about it. We're going to bring everybody, your voice is heard. So it's not just about the quantity, but it's something about having a quality, seasoned man or woman or somebody who embraces teaching, who loves it, and who has some authority in the school system, and is able to not just hear but take those messages of all the hurt and really turn it into policy that's advantageous for the Black educator. And when you do that, you have a stage that's advantageous for all kids. For all kids. What mayor, what president, what politician, regard who does not want a thriving school system? Who does not want a thriving school system where not only are our students excelling and getting state championships, but they're also, getting high college admission rates. They're happy. They're doing community pro projects. They're able to show up with pride on that first day of school in school teachers and be like, dang, another school year. Who doesn't want that? Everybody wins.
Yeah, I love this. The idea of the legacy.
Yes.
Teachers who bring in teacher. Yeah, the legacy is so important. You're exactly right. All right, folks, we're going to go on a break. When we get back, we'll continue our interview. Be back. All right, welcome back, folks, for my favorite part of the show. So, starting off, first things first, Langston, is there a Black educator or multiple that you would like to shout out on our show?
Well, I'm looking at you right now, Dr. A, and I gotta shout you out because of your podcast, it has increased my my mental health. I actually listen to your podcast as I'm doing my self care walking in the morning. So I want to start off with you and everyone who's been on the show. I found a little piece of me in every single story. But I have a brother-in-law who's in Minneapolis schools, public schools, does the same thing. His name is Alex Leonard, and Minneapolis schools have been through quite a bit with social justice and so forth. And he was my person that I would phone a friend when I was ever having a difficult time as a dean and so forth, and checking the pulse of how they're dealing with the community because they have real stuff that they're dealing with there too. And another fellow dean of mine, Webster Johnson the second. He's done some dean work in the schools, and he's been kind of like a phone a friend as well. And the third person I want to shout out, if I can, well, the fourth would be that there was a assistant principal when I was in seventh grade. I cannot remember his name, but he was a reverend. And I remember we were out in the field fighting or brawling, whatever. And each and every person, he would give them their suspension, send them off, give them their suspension, send them off. And last of all, it was Langston in the office. And he had on his, preaching suit. And he just said, Langston, he said, you're different. He said, you have no business being out there fighting. I said, but out there, he said, I don't want to hear that. He said, I left you in here last on purpose because I want to tell you my story to you is different than them. That is not you. The fighting out in the field, the foul language, that's not you. And he saw that in me. And I tried to be that to every single youth that I come across. I try and say, hey, what you done or been a part of or what you done, that's not you. And so those are my shout outs, Dr. A.
Yeah, I love that. Your story about your seventh grade assistant principal reminds me of my principal at Clark Elementary in Detroit. I've never been in the principal's office. I am a nerd. I
Ditto here.
I will write a strong. I will write a strongly worded email before I before I get into any kind of altercation with people, and folks know that about me. But I just remember so many black male principals I've had over the years. We can get into that a little bit some other time, but yeah, I appreciate you sharing that story. So then the next question is, like, now that you're no longer in a traditional education space, what are you doing now?
Right now, I'm co-founder and director of men and youth programs for me and my wife's organization, Adam's Purpose. It's a organization that was birthed out of our own pain and our lived experience that offers hope and healing for those of us in the African American community who have experienced loss. And that comes with, individual therapies for Black moms and Black moms of color, group therapy, and we're introducing this fall circle healing groups. So I'm very excited about that. That's something that is not often talked about enough in the African American community, and quite often we need to be comfortable enough to be able to grieve in safe places. Dr. Asia, I've heard you talk a lot about, Black grief and how that shows up in the education space and honestly, how that does get intertwined in our own grief when we get to those certain ages, like I am when we start to lose our parents, when we get to those certain ages, when we start getting in pre-grief where our parents are getting older and we have to, take care of them and also to be able to deal with the grief that we have, how it affects our families, how it affects our health, our mental health, how it affects our diet. And so really looking to offer some the services. We do social outings, horse therapy, art therapy. We've done the paint and sip. Some of us paint, some of us sip, but it's all good. Some of us do a little bit of both. But it's a way of normalizing grief, and that's one of the things that really drew me into on your podcast. You talk about Black grief, and Black grief is different because it's systemic. It's things that we deal with every day. But when we come, not only with that Black grief that comes with systemic racism, but when we lose those who are our loved ones, when the loss of a child, which me and my wife experienced, which I don't put that on anyone. When we see in this community those who are teenagers, schools are grieving. You can walk into certain schools and you can feel that, like, what is going on with this school? And I've come to, I could probably do the research that that whole community is grieving. The staff members, the family members, they're grieving. Maybe it's a loss. We're in the community of Elijah McClain, rest in peace. We're in the community where there's been a lot of untimely death. There's and some things hit the news, some things don't, but to talk about it, a safe place to process that grief, a safe place to go through the stages of grief, a safe place for us that's culturally relevant, connecting to therapists of color, connecting to peer advocates of color. And so that's what I'm doing these days, Dr. A.
I love that. Adam's Purpose. And just tell us the website and email so we can have people reach out if they'd love to learn more
Right.
information, please.
It's www.adamspurpose.org. And we have website. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We're on LinkedIn. And you can see, pictures on there. You can sign up for community events. You can sign up for more information. There's a lot of personal stories on there that you may find yourself in of those who have impacted grief and loss. But basically, there's a term that I've been rolling with. It's called Ujima, and it's one of the concepts of Kwanzaa. And I've been rolling in that for a couple years now. And that means a community that heals together. And so I want to be a part of that.
Mm.
I'm an introvert by nature, and so I can connect with the introvert. I'm also a class clown by nature. How does that happen? And so I can connect with you on that aspect. And so whichever it is, we want to meet, anybody where they're at. And we're a safe place. People that look like us, people that grieve differently, people who, after their 2 weeks of bereavement off, they have to go back to work. And if it's a different relationship, maybe you just have one day of bereavement, and you better show that that obituary to your boss. And so we want to normalize that in a healthy way and say it's okay to grieve. It's actually healthy to grieve.
Absolutely love that. And thank you for that work. Beautiful. Last question. What's been bringing you joy these days?
As I smile, I enjoy spending time with my wonderful wife, Shaynika. I and my boys, Elijah, Josiah, and Seth. I love to get outside and I love to walk. Um, I enjoy sunshine. One of the things that I've started to enjoy that's on TV is just the Safari Channel. And the Safari Channel is basically like the water hole live in at an African safari, where you just watch and you just hear the sounds of the birds, and whatever animals come by, they just gradually get a drink of water. They just stretch out and lay. And so those that connection to nature, that walking, that sunshine, and of course listening to the Exit Interview podcast gives a brother joy.
I love that. Well, folks, this is it. Our time is up. We've had a great conversation. If you feel like Adam's Purpose is something that you need to be a part of, don't hesitate. Thank you all so much for being on the show. If you know someone who should be archiving their story on the exit interview, make sure that you send them this episode. And I'll talk to you later. Peace.